welcome to Innovation and Leadership. I'm Jess Larsen. Excited for this episode to have Amar Goel, CEO at Bido, founder, CEO over at a number of other companies, but specifically we're going to be talking a bunch about PubMatic and their path to going public and reaching a peak valuation of $4 billion. But also I want to go back to talking about starting a company in your dorm room at Harvard and time at McKinsey and Microsoft before, is it Comey? Is that how I say that company?
Comely Media.
Comely, I'm sorry. Comely. So let's do this. Let's start off with why we should all be using ChatGPT to code, or telling our coders who work for us to get on Bido to do that 10 times faster.
Yeah, totally. So I would say use ChatGPT for coding. I would say use Bido for coding. But yes, yeah, look, I think we really believe that obviously as LLMs kind of exploded onto the world last year, I mean, they've obviously been around for a while, but I think not that many people started paying attention until last year. And then obviously the beginning of this year, I think, we kind of felt like there is a pretty big, change coming to how software development happens. And, I'm not a developer today, but I was a developer a long time ago. I worked at Netscape actually a long time ago when it was kind of all the rage, the first browser, professional browser, I guess, if you will. Our core team are all ex-developers and developers. And so, we really think that, hey, how we do software is going to change a lot. And everything from, writing code, but writing test cases, how do we debug things? How do we figure out how to build something? I mean, all those things we think are really, the fundamental processes in software development we think are going to change, and developers can use, AI to really help them be dramatically more productive. We think that developers are probably going to be able to be 5 to 10x more productive over the next few years. And so we want to provide the tools and the capabilities and the platform that really enable that change. And so, we've just kind of started on a journey where we provide like a chat tool and a kind of tool to help you complete your code as you write it, but also things to help you automate various parts of your process, like writing test cases or documenting code. So yeah, we've got about 100,000 developers, and it's really, we're early in the journey, but 100,000 developers are actively using the tools, and we're really excited to see where we can take it.
Well, and I look on the website, I see all these companies, Uber and Nike and all these people using it. I think I saw some stat that 37% of the NASDAQ 100 are using it or something like this.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, we've just launched some paid plans, but primarily our users are free and they're able to just download it and get going. We really wanted it to be a tool that you can get going in 2 minutes with. And honestly, I was surprised to see that, we have all these users who are signing up and using it. And then we kind of went to look at who are our users? And obviously we have a lot of Gmail addresses and Hotmail addresses and all the Yahoo addresses, but then we're like, wait, we got users at all these companies, and so to me, that was pretty exciting that all these folks who are really serious developers are getting value out of these kinds of tools, using it. I'm sure they didn't all love our tools, but these are all people who are using our tools regularly, and so that's exciting and kind of tells me we're onto something. We have a lot of work to do, don't get me wrong, but people really believe that this is a sea change and can happen.
I want to talk a lot about it, but I want to talk in context of your previous successes. So
and failures.
Sure. Let's talk about PubMatic. Tell people what it does.
Yeah. So PubMatic is basically a platform that we're in the digital advertising space. And it's really a company that's trying to build the supply chain of digital advertising. And so we sort of say all ads are going digital, which a lot of people didn't believe when I started the company 15 years ago with my co-founders. And then we say all digital is going programmatic. And programmatic is this idea that ads are being traded over APIs, It's not happening via a steak dinner and a martini classically and an IO, an insertion order that was I sold newspaper ads in college. And, it was you would send over a form to somebody and they would sign it, and then they might email it back to you, or they might fax it back to you, and then you would kind of enter it into your order system. Now all of that's happening, via APIs in a dynamic way. So, we do 500 billion ad auctions a day, in 100 milliseconds. And so that is, where we think all advertising is going. And that is a complex supply chain where advertisers and publishers are really trying to, maximize their revenue, maximize their ROI. They want to make sure their ads show in the right places. And that could be on the web, that could be on mobile, that could be on CTV, on video. And so PubMatic is, really focused on building that complete platform for that type of advertising.
You saying that made me think about being a newlywed in Huntington Beach, California, working for the Yellow Pages, and having my bosses say things like, I was like 22, my boss would say things like, I've been in this industry for 21 years. And, can you imagine if somebody has a pipe break going to Google to look for a plumber? That is never going to happen. Everybody knows you can trust this book and they're going to flip it open. I'm not saying the internet won't be around, but it will never replace this. And we're all like look at each other sideways, like, should we say something? What are you talking about, lady?
That's amazing, Back to the future, if you will, you know what I mean? Wow, that's crazy. Yeah, I mean, there was a time when everyone thought, and what's the famous story is what similar to that, right? The Encyclopedia Britannica, right? I had a set of encyclopedias growing up. And I remember my brother in high school a couple times would he said he had to write a paper, and he just went to AOL and grabbed a bunch of the text off the, I forget what their encyclopedia was called, but, and he was like, no one's even here. No one even notices,
Too funny. Well, let's do this. I know markets all over the place and valuations are all over the place right now, but, talking about building the kind of company that can reach a peak valuation of $4 billion. If you're talking to somebody today who is hoping to follow that kind of a path, what are your principles for building a $1 billion company?
I think, I guess I'll come at it maybe from tech, if you will, because I think it can be different in different industries. Although, I think that being said, a lot of the core principles are probably don't change that much, right? I think, I think one is you have to be long-term oriented, so many people talk about the decade-long overnight success, PubMatic, we started it in 2006 and we went public in 2020. So it's 14 and a half years, so the overnight decade plus long success type thing, right? And so people, I think, forget how long it can take to build valuable companies, and it can just take to even get to kind of product market fit or just then scale it up, right? So I think you have to be long-term oriented in your own mindset about how long it's going to take. It's not a quick thing, but I think you also have to be long-term oriented in thinking about how the industry will play out and how the, things will change. I think, what I mean by that is a lot of times you say, well, I want to do X, and the industry, it's never going to happen that way, or because you're thinking in a short-term fashion, and so you have to find a wedge in. You have to find a way to get that first customer and that first 10 customers. And if you're pitching a perfect future that, they're well, that's not enough to get me started. But you have to really kind of keep that North Star about hey, what is the industry going to look like in 10 years? What is going to play out? Because I think there can be a lot of blockers in the short term that prevent it, but probably what you think is going to happen in the long term in terms of incentives and industry structure will often play out in the long run. And so you kind of want to make sure you're well positioned to win in the long run, it's not about winning in the short run. So that would be, yeah.
So let's go for an example. What was that at PubMatic?
Yeah. So, I think I'll give you maybe, one example, when, it's maybe basic one, but just programmatic advertising when it started, right? It was hey, this idea of that we're going to have this a sell side system and a buy side system connect and like efficiently kind of buy and sell advertising. Well, look, that's like a whole marketplace. It's kind of like, it's like a bit of like a NASDAQ exchange or a New York Stock Exchange. And like at first, nobody's on the exchange. There's no digital trading happening, right? If you think about the not NASDAQ, but New York Stock Exchange, it started as like these kind of, people in a pit, right? So, waving the buy and sell orders and saying, I match with you, I match with you, and I think that New York Stock Exchange, would kind of say, oh, well, that's going to be the best way. We need the humans to kind of do it. But I mean, over time, we've seen that it's become more and more digital, right? And billions and billions of shares trading hand, and the vast majority is even trading in these like dark pools and all this stuff. And that's all happening in a very digital way, And so I think you would say, hey, that trend. So for PubMatic, it was like, okay, most of the advertising is still happening in a maybe very physical IO, where you insertion orders, like you said, the example you gave about the yellow pages, right? I mean, you would probably, somebody would phone you up or you would phone that plumber and you would say like, hey, how much are you going to pay for this spot, right? And so, yeah, that's kind of like how it was then, but you're like, I think this is a way better way to do it, but it didn't happen overnight, In fact, I remember getting yelled at by like our engineers when we first built it. We kind of built the first exchange to sell advertising on the supply chain. So the publisher would like make that inventory available, and then we would be, saying, okay, who wants to buy this? And there was no bidders on the other side, right? And so engineers were like, we should have thought about this, like we should have like made this, why did we build this if there's no bidders on the other end? And I mean, I'm not saying that like we knew it was going to be right. I'm just saying that as you started to see that volume build, you're kind of like, hey, this probably makes a lot more sense. It's probably a lot more efficient, for a bunch of different reasons. I won't get into that now, but it was like, hey, this is a fundamentally better way to do it. Just like maybe the NASDAQ is like, hey, electronic trading is a better way than having people match orders, right? And so physically. And so that would be an example, maybe that was a little long-winded, but that would be an example of how, thinking about where the long-term trend is going and then to really bet, deeply on that, can make a big difference.
It makes me think about that cliche from Wayne Gretzky about skating to where the puck is going to be.
Yeah. I mean, great, right? Great idea, right? And you have to do it in a balanced way, right? I mean, you can't just be like, oh, like it doesn't, today is irrelevant, or I'm going to 10 years out. Well, then, you probably don't have a business for a while, so you got to find a way to get a wedge in to get started, but you got to make sure you keep your eye on like where things are going.
Yeah. It makes me think about Peter Thiel in his book, 0 to 1, about how can you be, how can you have a contrarian but correct thought? What do you believe that almost nobody else believes or very few other people believe, but that you're actually right about? And like become the category king, build a defensible, differentiated position. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great book. I'm probably not smart enough to understand everything that he said in that book, but one of the things he said in that book, if I remember correctly, I'm pretty sure he said it because it always kind of stuck with me. He was like, "Oh, the best businesses have no competition," and it's like it's almost kind of a weird thing, but you're like, yeah, like you don't want any competition reduces your profits, right? And so, yeah, it's great to be the only game in town for XYZ. Not that I'm saying you want to like charge people an unfair price, but it sort of lets you, innovate in a better way, invest in a deeper way, and make, monopoly rents, right? So, I mean, if you look at like the businesses that are the most highly valued, and there's lots of arguments about whether they're monopolies or not, but they're all like, don't have a lot of competition in their core business areas. They're kind of the only game in town, and what they do, people really need, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of, truth in that book around that,
You brought up product market fit before. It's honestly my favorite question to ask you folks that have built companies over the billion mark. There's so many definitions for it. What's your definition of product market fit?
Yeah, I mean, Mark Andreessen has a definition around like the the market is pulling the product out of you. I think that's like it's a good kind of definition. I would say that that's a very hard to attain, right? That's sort of like the purest form of product market fit. I think most companies don't really ever achieve that. But I think like maybe the kind of related or the derivative of that, right, is that, essentially like when you talk to that target customer about what you have or whatever, they hear about it or whatever, like they really can use that and get value out of it, in a significant way, right? And so I think, that's not as elegant as his definition for sure, but I feel like you can feel it, you're like, hey, you go and talk to that customer, and again, or they read about it, or they listen on a podcast, or they read some content or whatever, and they're like, this is pretty good stuff, like I need this, right? This is going to solve an important problem for me, or maybe it's going to solve a problem I didn't know I have. But I think that is what product market fit is, and I think one of the big things that I feel like I've learned over time is that you can hear it quickly in the market. I know I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs who are like, hey, I did a bunch of pitches to customers and they're not interested, but they're not getting it, and I'm like, I think you're not getting it, and I've been there. I've been that person many, many times in my career, it's like, you have to take your ego out of it, and you have to really like listen to what those people are saying, and I feel like if you kind of have 3, 4, 5 people tell you no, and again, this is when you're super early and you get your first thing out. If everybody's kind of like, no, you got to think through, like, is this the wrong customer segment or whatever? But if you're like, I think we're talking to the right people and they're all saying no, then you probably should think about, like, is this a real solution that's going to meet a need? You can go talk to 100 people to make sure you like really find out like that those first 5 or 8 didn't really, weren't correct. But I generally am like, all right, we've talked to 10 people. They're not interested in this. We should stop trying to push this. And we need to really listen to what they've said. And like, do we need to like pivot hard, or do we need to just, course correct a little bit? But you got to remove your ego and listen to what people are saying and use that to adapt your product or strategy or whatnot.
Yeah. As you're talking, I was thinking about my question, and I actually feel like it's got a problem in it. To think about product market fit is like a light switch and it's on or off. The more people that I get to talk to that have built companies into the billions or tens of billions, it feels more like a dimmer switch to me, or like it's like there's an electric guitar amp. Are we at a 1, or we at a 2, or we at a 3, or a 4, right? It's like, it feels like degrees of product market fit is maybe a better analogy. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, I think, look, you could say product market fit is, like let's go back to that, one of the definitions, of like where it's really resonating with that customer base. They're pulling it out of you, or they're just like, I need this or whatever. But I don't think you get there, like you said, in that 0 to 1, right? You kind of get there in this, it's an iterative process, it's a progression. And I think one of the points I was making before, I would kind of reiterate it, is like, you got to remove your ego, because if you, and the reason I say that is because you're going to iterate to go from where you start to, like, let's say that's the 0 and then the 1 is product market fit. And, Peter Thiel's book, it's like, well, that is a process and it takes time. And if you're kind of stuck on where you were, where you start, and you're not really willing to like iterate and listen, it's hard to get to the 1, and so that takes time, and I think sometimes you have to be really willing to pivot hard, and sometimes it's just more course correcting, PubMatic, is like, I would say that programmatic advertising didn't exist when we started. We started by optimizing ad networks, but it wasn't like a huge course correct from where we were because it didn't exist. So we were helping publishers, like there's these entities called ad networks, and then we were helping them optimize that in real time. And then we were like, hey, this programmatic thing. We were talking to people. We were like, oh, I think this is similar but better. And so we kind of built that. And it was like that, point 1, point 2, point 3, that dimmer switch you talk about. Bido, just another example is like we started out saying we're going to build this collaboration platform for developers. We said we're going to try to bring a Google Docs and Slack type experience to your code, and how you work on your code. And everybody would say, oh, this looks super cool. Like, let me know when I could try it. And then we would give it to people and nobody would use it. And we're like, why aren't you using it? And they'd say, well, we kind of just do all our collaboration in Slack, and sort of we kind of realize like Slack is kind of like a black hole of collaboration, and I don't mean that in a negative way, just that's where everybody it's the watering hole, and that's where kind of everyone collaborates. And so we were like, okay, now, what are we going to do? Now we kept listening to people, and they were like, well, I could use this to onboard new people, maybe. And then we'd say, okay, how could you do that? I'm like, well, we could use it to explain code, but I don't want to explain the code myself. Could you just use AI to like explain the code? And so that's how we ended up kind of building this AI assistant and AI toolset. But that was, I would say, more of a, pivot away where it was more of a different thing. And so I think, again, I don't know if what we're doing now will turn out to be as great as sliced bread, but, I think we're onto something. And it was like willing to kind of like listen to what people wanted and give up and make that leap, going forward. So those are two different experiences, but I think both are, like you said, a little bit of that, iterative process, dimmer switch going 0 to 1.
So let's talk about both PubMatic and Bido. When did you feel like at PubMatic and when at Bido did you feel like, okay, we're edging in on product market fit? Like we are getting close. We are getting pull. We're starting to see the signs. Like we might be real close.
There's an element, I think, as a founder where it's never good enough, right? And so, like startups are this state of mind. I kind of say, they're not a physical thing. They're like, you can always be like, we got to iterate, we got to do better. What's that next thing? This is not addressing that. So there is an element of that where you always kind of feel like, hey, we're not at the promised land, if you will. But, that being said, I think, there's an element, like you said, of, okay, well, we have an offering today that is resonating in the market, right? And people are pulling it out. So, I think in PubMatic, again, I don't know that there was like some light bulb switch, but I think, we launched kind of our real-time bidding capabilities in 2008. And I think it was really in, kind of 2009, 10, when probably 2011, when it really started to scale, and it really kind of felt like this is going to be a thing. I mean, candidly, I don't think we ever were like, we thought this is going to be huge, but it wasn't always clear to us that we were going to be the winner in the space. You know what I mean? Like, you're like, this is how it's all going to work, but like, are we going to still be living? You know what I mean? And of course, you're growing and all that, but I think when you're in the fog of war, there's always so much going on around you. You're not like sitting there thinking, we're on easy street now, I think with Bido, I'd say in some ways I feel like, yeah, we're kind of early in that product market fit. Like we have a lot of users who are really excited, and using it really aggressively and regularly. And we get a lot of great feedback. And we have a bunch of people who are now starting to pay us, which is great. But I don't at all yet feel like, oh yeah, like we're there, and I think I'm hoping that maybe in a year we'll be there, but I think, again, it's that iterative process. And I'm a product person, so I'm always like, falsely probably like, that next big feature is like, when can we get this out? When can we get this in people's hands? Like, this is going to be the thing, probably like ridiculously overly optimistic too. So, so I think my wife's always more of a, not a downer, but a pragmatist, I would say, she's like, I don't know if that's gonna really be the big thing, But anyways, I'm always like, hey, what can we do that really makes it magical? Like where everybody is like, oh my God, I need this, and just pulling it out of you, And I think we have that opportunity at Bido. but we're not there yet,
Let's talk about fundraising. So whether it's roadshow for going public on the NASDAQ or raising your first angel round, like looking somebody in the face and asking for a check, or however this is happening, right? What's one of your tried and true investment principles that you try to bring every time you have to have that kind of conversation?
It's definitely changed over the years because I think my story has changed, and so so it's maybe different. When I was 22 and I just graduated from college and I decided to turn down, like I was lucky enough to have some job offers and I decided to turn them down and do my this company, ChipShot, was an e-commerce company. And I basically went to like my old boss from, when I'd worked in sales and trading at an investment bank one summer. And I still kind of remember, this is kind of a hilarious story where I basically was like, hey, would you be interested in like investing in ChipShot? And I was in New York or New Jersey. He was in New Jersey for a wedding and he said, oh, come meet me. And, and we'll talk about it. And so I meet him at his hotel and he's like, I forgot to bring shoes for this wedding. So we drove to a Payless shoe store. And he was like walking around the aisles trying to like find a pair of shoes that fit, like some, black, whatever, loafers or whatever. And we negotiated a $50,000 angel investment and evaluation and all that over that. Now he knew me, right? So I'd worked for him one summer. And so I guess I fooled him into thinking I was bright and hardworking. But that was kind of, that's obviously not your typical kind of situation. I think over time, what I've kind of come to realizing is like, they're basically want to believe that this can be a big thing, like, can this be a big business? At least that's the classic venture. I mean, there's lots of investments that happen where people are looking for a dividend or, just like, hey, I want something that's stable. But I think if you're thinking about the classic kind of Silicon Valley fundraising, if you will, yeah, I think they're like, can this be big? Can this have moat? Can this like the no competition, and that Peter Thiel kind of thing? And is this team, can they get it done? And so are they the right people to build this? I mean, I think that's like fundamentally like what it kind of comes down to. Now there's lots of sub bullets under each one of those, but I kind of feel that that's what it comes down to. Maybe one other thing I'll put in the current environment is the price right? I think over the last few years when capital was free, people were kind of willing to pay any price because they were just like, oh, can this be $1 billion or $10 billion thing in whatever down the road? I think now people are like, well, money has a cost to it. And so thanks to the Fed. So, am I overpaying for my entry point? And I think that's like another big thing that's come into play over the last, let's say, year and a half.
It goes back to something you've kind of been touching on, is this intellectual honesty of like having a look in the mirror and, is this the sales pitch or is this the truth? Like, what do we, right? What about actually in the meeting?
It's actually, can I comment on that? Because I think it's a great point. I had an engineer tell me one time, like, oh, I don't think I could be a salesperson. I don't think I could lie, for my job, And I was like, I don't think that's what salespeople believe they're doing, But it kind of maybe gets at like a point, which you were kind of alluding to, which is, look, when you're talking to investors or you're talking to somebody who's going to join your team or you're talking to a potential customer, you are selling, But you got to believe what you're saying, I mean, if you're just flat out making stuff up, like, that's not going to work out in the long run, like there's going to be hell to pay down the road. Right. And so you gotta believe what you're saying. And if you don't believe it, I mean, you can get away here and there, but like, if you don't really believe what you're selling to whatever audience it is, then it's just not going to be real in the long run.
Well, this is especially poignant for me. Like, I became a millionaire in my 20s, lost it speculating, made it back, lost it speculating again. And that's the reason I'm like very interested in owning, low debt commercial real estate for multiple decades. And, right. And like, It's not just how much you make, it's how much you keep.
Yeah. What was that like? I mean, that's got to be tough.
The worst was like my grandpa was my hero in life. Losing his money, aunts and uncles, family stress. I mean, like, not only did I get wiped out personally, and nobody even lost, I don't know, a sixth as much as I did. But I don't care. I'm like, well, I'm an entrepreneur. I can make it back again, right? It's like the people that you love who trusted you, and it was, something outside of your control. But I think about those times and I think like, did I believe it because it's what I wished the answer was? And I think that had a lot to do with it, right? Some of it was inexperience. Some of it was that I hadn't been bitten by life, so I hadn't studied Warren Buffett like I have spent the last dozen years obsessed about. Okay. And I thought, oh, we're co-invested with these two billionaires. I mean, I'm sure they've done their due diligence, or just dumb things like that, right? One time I was co-invested with a billionaire and we were partnered with a $31 billion company. A different one, we were partnered with a $60 billion company. And you're like, oh, I mean, these guys have gone through it, I'm sure, and it's like, nope, lost it all anyways. And so this idea of like not fooling myself because I'm the easiest one to fool, and like asking the hard questions of like, is this really the answer, or is this what I hope the answer is? And how, like, I love Howard Marks. He manages 180 billion. He's one of the only guys in the world Warren Buffett's endorsed his book, right? And he says, like, protecting the downside is how you keep long-term investors. And if you didn't make quite as much as the other guy on the upside, you're still going to keep them. It's when the crap hits the fan and people are panicking and you're not as vulnerable as everybody else because you're proactively defensive. We talked about the Peter Thiel thing, right? Like, if you're a commodity, if you're one of many, but you don't have a better cost structure, you're not Walmart where you literally are like genuinely have a different cost structure than your competition. Like, where is all this faith that you're going to be the winner if we have 2008 again?
Well, I think it's really hard, right? Because you have to believe, like you said, like in what you're selling or what you're saying or what, you have to have that intellectual rigor and honesty to really like, is this headed in the direction I want it to head, or like what is the direction it's actually heading in versus what's the direction I want it to head in?
Well, I know I can trust someone when they go out looking for disconfirming evidence. They go talk to the smartest people, they read the books of the smartest people, and they are looking to try and figure out if they're wrong. But like, they're genuinely trying to say, hey, why would I overinvest in this if it's not going to get there? I may as well find out now. And like, when I can sense that in a person, then I get excited, right? I'm like, ooh, this is somebody I could do business with.
And I would say like, there's a counterpoint to it too, which is like, you have to be still okay with some uncertainty, I think you got to be open to failure, I think like that's something I see in people and, even myself, right? Especially as you maybe get a little more successful, your ego kind of gets back in the way about you being open to like, yeah, it's okay to fail, because you're trying to protect that whatever image or you have yourself or maybe other people have of you. And so you want that story to be good, and so you got to be intellectually honest and you got to like be rigorous. And like you said, look for that disconfirming evidence, but you can't let it stop you from trying things, or you can't 100% let it stop you from trying things.
I want to talk about this because you're smarter than me and we all know this because you've got better results than me. So you think about like ideas like Great by Choice, Jim Collins' follow-up book, where he says, shoot bullets, not cannonballs. And if the bullets get to the enemy ship, then shoot the cannonball, right? Like survivable experiments, survivable failures, right? And to me, like, I'm even thinking about something you talked about earlier of like, you got to have the vision for where this industry is going to end up. And we're going to get there first. We're going to be the category king. But you also have to figure out how to survive between now and when it gets there. And there's potentially opposing things, right? And it's like, I had two pro football players on the show yesterday. And they talked about this idea of like, having the delusionalness that you're going to make it into the NFL or make it to the pros when statistically you're not. Like if you believe in statistics, you're not going to make it to the pros. So there's like, they talked about this idea of like delusion enough to believe it enough to put in the work, and then enough intellectual honesty, they call it taking inventory, okay? Of like, okay, what is not matching up about my performance? What's working? What's not working? Let's be brutally honest with ourselves, and let's do the work that the other guys aren't willing to do on the things where I'm not nailing it. And like one of them talked about like when coach would say, do 10 push-ups, he's like, I would sneak in 12. And I'd be like, yeah, I got 2 more on the other guys. And the other one was like, I played quarterback, but I got recruited to be a receiver. I'd never done that before. And on my first day, as I'm flipping through the book, I look at the back and San Diego State record was 195 receptions. I thought, I don't care, I've never played this position before. I'm going to break that record. And 4 years later, he had 262 receptions and 13 other all-time records, and ended up playing for the Panthers in Miami and Dallas Cowboys in the end. And he's like, I just had to train differently. I had to go like, ooh, I'm not fast enough. So he's like, I didn't necessarily work harder than everybody, but I was smart enough to work on what I had to work on so I could be fast enough to get in position. And he sprinted differently and these kind of things. So thinking about this for $1 billion success secrets, it's like enough delusion plus taking enough inventory. I want you to improve on that. Tell me what I don't understand about that.
I would agree with that, right? I maybe I've kind of touched on it in slightly different ways, but like, so I remember very first thing I think I might have said here was like, you got to be long-term oriented, right? So you got to, have that delusion about like, or think about where is this going? But then you got to find that wedge in, like, what is your way in? Again, this is more not for training to be an NFL person, but like, to get product market fit is like, what is that thing that's going to work today? And you got to take small experiments. I think, I see this a lot. I'm almost probably too much on the other side, but like people are like, I raise a big round of funding and I put out the press release and they kind of view that as like, I'm successful, and it's like, no, we haven't really done anything yet, like that's not the success. The success is getting something out there that people are using and willing to pay you more than it costs you to make, and so, I mean, I think that comes from lots of small wins, and it's not about being in the limelight, I think you got to just put your head down and work your ass off, and just keep going at it for 10 years, for 20 years, it's not.
I'm going to push you on that a little bit. Okay. And I really want your answer for AI because I am fascinated with AI. We got so close to submitting for $1.25 million grant from the Air Force for an AI tool we've been building internally. We talk about this a lot internally, but we're a little more focused on our investment fund business at the time, right now. So we're like, maybe we'll apply for February. But when you think about just the craze, I mean, like the overhype of aspects of it, and yet it's not hard to go like, oh, this is not NFTs. This is like the invention of the internet. Like this is not, this is not your buddy saying, I'm building a record company on crypto, right? This is like genuine 10x, 100x efficiencies for the people to do it. And yet, you get Netflix. I just saw a Netflix ad for a $900,000 a year employee, for positions they're hiring, right? And I think Google had a $1.4 million job offer, right? And you're in like the concept that we are going to come up with something that everyone else isn't in the middle of this gold rush. There's an aspect of it that like, I'm really interested in your brain of like, okay, what are we going to invent that isn't easily duplicated by somebody else, that is going to be defensible, that is something where we can be the category king and hold on to that position? As you think about that with just the untold amounts of government money being dumped in and untold amounts of VC money being dumped in. And so it's like being honest that you don't have a guarantee, but having the internal conviction, no, we've got what it takes to stay the course. And we've got enough ingenuity and internal know-how to pivot and progress. And so I'm just doing a lot of talking here, but I want to know what's going on in your brain.
Yeah, like let's go back to when the internet started, right? I mean, internet started a long time ago, but let's say the internet bubble boom that happened in the late 90s that you could say was maybe similar to this AI, boom, bubble, whatever. So I think Yahoo went public in maybe 1995 or 96. I think Amazon went public around then as well. And there's so many, you go to like 97, 98, 99, so much venture capital was being poured into all these things. And it's like you said, like now, right? It was like, oh my God, how are you going to out invent, the world? But like Google was started, I think, in 1998, Facebook was started in probably like 2004, like there's lots of amazing businesses that came out. I mean, those are just two consumer examples, but there's like so many other.
When did Spotify come out? When did Uber come out?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like so many, B2B and, Salesforce was started in 1999 or 2000 maybe, like, so, I mean, there's just so many, Atlassian was probably started in like 2005 or something. So, I mean, there's just so many great companies that came out, not in that initial, kind of whatever boom moment, if you will, but came out in the years following. And so I almost kind of am like, how can you not build something amazing? I'm not like worried about, oh, there's so many people. I'm just like, keep your head down, focus on building a great product and in a great area that is really useful. And I think you'll do fine, I'm not saying like you can completely ignore the competition and all that stuff, but I think people spend a lot of time worrying about all the competition and this and that. I think if you just stay focused on like building a great product that's doing something interesting and unique, I think that you can build a really good business. I think to build a massive, massive business, you also, you have to end up doing something that, like Peter Thiel said, super contrarian, nobody else does it. And you get a little lucky that nobody else decides to compete with you. I mean, look, at any given time, any of the big tech companies can decide they want to do something in your space, and they might end up making the world really competitive, or they might just misexecute. It's hard to know what's going to happen.
Google Plus.
Yeah, exactly. Google Plus, total, POS, compared to Facebook, and basically, went nowhere. Microsoft Teams, gave Slack a real run for its money, and made the world very competitive for Slack. Now, it launched a lot later, and Slack, built still a great business. I'm not taking anything away from them, but I'm just saying that was an area where a big tech company like really did a great job and competed very well, So it just, happens in different times and, different ways. But I think my point is like, just rewinding a little bit, is like, just focus on building something great and, try to do it in a way where you're headed to where the North Star is going to be, unique and differentiated. And not focus on like all the noise around you, like in this AI boom, just to give you like a more tangible example, like in December and January, in November, like when ChatGPT came out, I mean, everybody was like, oh my God, like, everyone's going to lose their jobs and AI is going to do everything. And, there was like, what is the future of software? And like, you don't even need software anymore. AI is going to do everything. And I mean, some of that stuff will still come true in the very long run. So like, but I think what we're seeing is that like, well, it's still really hard to build good products, it's still really the same principles apply about like, you got to be really clear about what it is you're trying to accomplish. And then like, how does that product actually work? And is it easy to use? And is it intuitive? And all those things didn't go out the window, And so, I mean, here we are, not quite a year later, but almost a year later. And I would say, I think most people would be like, my life is not like dramatically changed because of ChatGPT, So like, I think that there's still a very long road to go to build great products. And I think it's not easy.
Yeah, I've thought about that a little bit when I've driven around and just like literally looked around town and going like, I bet that guy's not using AI. I bet that woman's not using AI, right? And like, it's making some big changes. Like at our media company, last week, my the co-owner of my media company is my brother, much more technical. We kind of different parts of the spectrum we cover. And he and our main employee who works on our like AI and automation tools internally, they dropped a 2-hour process to 2 minutes. You know, that was a big deal. And then we have another process where we're processing like hundreds and hundreds of leads at a time, and they got it down from 4 minutes to like 30 seconds per lead or something, or 6 minutes to like something like 36, and like over hundreds in a day that, instead of taking multiple days, they can get it done in a day. Right. And so like, I do see like there's genuine like leapfrog advantages for the people that do figure it out, and so it is so fascinating to me. But I kind of like your kind of the gravitas, like the inner confidence of like, just really serve people, make it easy to use, make it intuitive, and have something special.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's what we're trying to do. I mean, I look at over my career, so much energy gets wasted about just like looking at like, not stargazing, but competition gazing or whatever, and you just think how much better off would I have been if I just used that energy to just keep my head down and keep building. Again, I'm not saying, Apple's famous for like sort of completely ignoring the competition, and just thinking, and, even Steve Jobs, like, I don't even care what customers say. I'm going to just tell, we're going to tell you what we think you should use. And I mean, obviously it works for them. The world's most valuable.
You know what though? I did have Steve Blank on the show. I had Steve Blank on the show a couple of times, and he obviously, father of the lean startup movement, startup owners manual, best-selling books, taught at Stanford for 20 years. He built like 8 startups. He sold his last one for $8 billion. And he's like, yeah, I live in Palo Alto. And I got to tell you, for supposedly Steve Jobs not wanting any feedback, I saw him in the Palo Alto store down from Stanford, talking and listening to customers all the time. So this idea of Steve never got any feedback, like, yes, some big ideas. Yes, some of these leapfrog things.
Yeah.
Maybe that wasn't from a customer, death by committee type meeting, but the idea that it didn't improve from customer feedback, he said the evidence doesn't support that.
That's good to know. I never heard of that. I never heard that story. That's very interesting. Yeah. So look, I was going to say, let's exclude them in the sense of like, they're just so unique in that perspective. But I think, you got to just kind of keep building and listening to what people are saying. And again, you got to project forward. Like, I don't think I think what's that? Henry Ford has a similar thing, right? He's like, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse, and then not built the car. So I think you have to balance that. Like, again, where is the industry going? What's possible? And a lot of customers don't really see that, but then you have to make it real for them today to something they can grasp.
Listen, I know we're almost out of time. What's another billion-dollar success secret?
I don't know, man. I think, it's funny. I feel like so much just comes down to be willing to like try new things and iterate and, hard work. I think we haven't talked that much about the team, the people that you're with, I think, on the journey. I think that's super important. But yeah, sorry, you were going to say something.
Let's talk about that previous one for 1 second. I'm interested in how you navigate the decision. It's like, man, I feel really strongly about this and nobody else gets it. At what point is it like, well, it's my job to lead and to educate them and to help them understand? And at what point, like, how do you decide between I don't get it or they don't get it?
A really simple litmus test is like, do they want to use your product? Like, it's really easy people don't want to hurt, other people's feelings. So they'll say, well, that sounds cool. That's, like, yeah, that's, oh man, amazing, but they just don't want to tell you that, like, what are you talking about, So
asking to pay with money.
Yeah, there's a book, I think it's called like The Mom Test, and this product manager kind of
Rob Fitzpatrick. I love that guy.
Yeah, okay, I forget his name, but yeah, so he wrote this book, right? And it's a really easy read, and it's a great book. Actually, my co-founder at Bido, Mukesh, kind of said, "Hey guys, we should read this." Or actually, a friend. So, anyways, whatever. Somebody recommended it to me. Yeah, he's kind of like this whole, it's funny title, but the whole point is like, if you ask your mom what she thinks, she loves you, you're her son. So she's going to be like, oh, that's cool. So you got to ask people you don't know, and you got to like, if at the end of the day, do they want to use what you have? Because that's kind of the litmus test, right? If they're like, oh, nodding their head or whatever, and then you say, hey, would you guys like to try it out? And then they say, well, I don't know if I'm really the right fit, or, we're not ready for it or whatever. And that's fine. That could be real. But like, if kind of everybody's saying that, then, then it, and you keep believing it, then you don't get it.
I love that answer because Steve Blank says people will lie to you and say they're going to buy it and then you build it and then they won't buy it, right? He's like, you got to go test it on them, say what's wrong with this, go back and fix it, test it on them, say what's wrong, and keep fixing it until they just start pushing money in your hands because it fits their problem so well, right? And I guess my question is even earlier than that, with your co-founders, investors, board members, something, it's like, should we even spend the time to build this to test it or not? And we don't get that kind of feedback. It's like, is this worth the next 6, 12 months of our life to even get this good enough to test? And you're the visionary of the company, right? And you've got this thing of like, not everybody on the team is on board. And you don't have the feedback loop yet of getting somebody to pay for it. At a time like that, when it really is more of an opinion-based investment at that point, how do you decide between, nope, this is where I have conviction we are skating to where the puck is going to be. And they're saying, well, we can skate there, but there's not going to be a puck there.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you kind of hit one of the nails on the head. Like that's a tough part, right? That's a tough time, right? When you ask people, a lot of times when you show them mock-ups or whatever, they will say, when you ask people like, hey, will you use this? They'll say, yeah, oh yeah, really interesting. And then you go spend all this time and build it. And I think candidly, like that's not been an easy thing to figure out. I mean, you'll read books that'll say, oh no, you could have given them mock-ups or you could do this, or, like what's the cheapest way to run a test? I think I don't have a great answer there. I do think,
guess you could ask for deposits.
yeah, well, I mean, and I think for some things like where, like you're trying to build some big, heavy product, that's like an enterprise thing, then yeah, you're right. You could say, hey, will you give us a, deposit? But I think, a lot of times when you're trying to do something more product-led growth, PLG, bottoms up, people just can try it out. I mean, imagine like Facebook, right? I mean, you're not going to like say, can you give me a deposit? I mean, like Mark Zuckerberg, I guess, just kind of thought, oh, this is something I would like to use, and so I think it's useful to think through, is there a cheap way to test this, and there's people who say, what's that way? Like, I'm trying to think of an example, right? But like,
but with Facebook, what if you had done a sign up page and then they actually sign up and you say, hey, just so you know, we're not taking new users yet. You'll be the first to be notified.
Right. It's like a wait list, right? And so a lot of people do that, right? And then they try to see, can they get a lot of people on the wait list? I mean, I don't know that that's always like you getting the most realistic feedback, but I mean, an interesting example is like Vanta, I think the founder there, Christina, they sort of help with SOC 2 compliance software, but she started out like her software, from what I remember she said, or she said she's spoken about, it's like, it was like a spreadsheet, and she was like, I will go and do this like in your company. Like, okay, I'm like a consultant and I have a spreadsheet that does it. So she didn't build the product. She just was like, do you want this service? And then I will be the consultant to deliver this for you, So maybe if you were doing some like HR management software or some enterprise workflow thing, you could kind of go and do that, right? Or like you said, you can maybe send a landing page and see how many people seem like they're interested in this, right? Or maybe you try to make like a mock-ups of a 2-minute demo. I mean, that can give you some sense. I think eventually you may have to try to build something, but again, how can you use that data about that, like you said, that landing page or that test to kind of give you a sense of how much interest is there in something like this, and I think it can get you a little bit closer. I do think certain products eventually you kind of have to build. Like we were trying to build a collaboration product at first at Bido. So like a lot of collaboration products is about like how it feels to use, like is it easy to chat with somebody and it easy to share my code and whatever. And so we tried to talk to a lot of people about it, but in the end, like we were like, we gotta build this, and then it was about iterating. And so that didn't work out well for us in that situation. But, you kind of go into it, like I said, with, if you start out saying what I'm starting with is not where I'm going to end up, you will be much more well prepared to deal with the setbacks you're going to have.
Sergey Brin at Google, I believe, said, even when you fail, it's hard to fail all the way because you end up learning something. It's like that you can't steer a parked car. Like you guys moving on the collaboration thing is what let you get to the place of we're the AI tool for coders, right?
You're totally right. Exactly. Like, it's just like you're kind of failing forward, right? I mean, you're just like trying stuff out and just keep trying stuff out. I mean, one of the other things I'll mention is I think a lot of startups like just run out of money. They run out of time, and kind of, one is the energy and one is the money. They say, okay, I believe that what I'm building is going to be big, and so I'm timing it with my seed round or whatever money I'm starting with, and I'm like, I'm going to launch, and like, this is going to be huge, and then they're like, well, I don't have any more money, and it didn't work out. And so you got to just give yourself that iteration time to like assume that you're going to be wrong, and don't run out of money until you get to product market fit.
I'd cut you off. Maybe this can be kind of our closing subject. Talk about $1 billion success secret when it comes to the kind of team that can get you to those kind of numbers, that type of scale.
I mean, team is super critical, right? I think like the reality is like, even if you have some incredible idea, like again, the whole conversation we had is like, you don't have an incredible idea. Like, you have the kernels of an idea and you need to iterate, but even if your first thing, is amazing, like let's say, there are some companies, Google's search engine like was pretty good on day one, but you can't build it all by yourself, and you need other amazing people around you. And the vast majority of companies are not awesome on day one. They take time to get there, and you got to have that group that can iterate with you and push everyone forward in a rigorous way. And again, even once you kind of start to have some inkling, you like need great marketing, you need great engineering, you need great product strategy, you need great partnerships, whatever it is that matters in your business. You can't do it all yourself. I don't think you can. I don't think you can build a huge business like really just on your own energy. And so I think you really need, a great team. I think it certainly makes it a lot more enjoyable when you have like a good team with you, but you also can scale a lot faster, And so I think like, having great co-founders or early folks who are awesome, I think can be a hugely additive thing to being successful.
Listen, you've been so generous with your time. Congratulations on all the success. If people either want to check out Bido or have their teams get on Bido, where should they be going?
Yeah, just check us out, Bido.ai, Bito.ai. Yeah, check out the website. Love to have you get your feedback. Tell us what stinks, what you want. Try it out. Yeah. But thank you so much for having me, and it was a fun conversation. And I still have lots to learn, but I hope maybe a couple of nuggets here and there might sink in with your audience.